My name is Joshua Gibson, and you are listening to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, a show dedicated to promoting a message of critical thinking as it pertains to strength training, nutrition, and well-being. This is done through interviews with experts, high-level athletes, coaches, and people heavily involved in strength sports and athletic development. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and let's get on to today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. My name is Joshua Gibson. I am your host. And as I just did in the previous episode of the podcast with Meredith Allwine, if you haven't listened to that, I would highly implore you to go check that out. That's episode 194. I'm going to do a quick plug for Virus INTL because through the month of April, if you use the code PHILWL, PHILWL, you'll get 20% off your entire purchase. And knowing that Virus is what I would say hands down the best like compression gear and clothing and weightlifting, I'd go check that out. So if you listen to the podcast with Meredith, I did a 2-minute thing about that. This is going to be 45 seconds. Today's guest is Zach Caswell. Zach, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm really excited to record this podcast, and I think a lot of that is because, as you mentioned, you're one of the guys, not one of the guys, I don't know how many there are, but you're someone who kind of rolls up to these big meets, has a really strong team, has a really impressive like gym, and I guess like place in weightlifting and strength and conditioning, but not a ton of people might have heard of you or are familiar with your background and kind of how you got into weightlifting, how you managed to build such an impressive kind of machine at this point. And I think it's, we've kind of been in conversation kind of the last few days and just hearing about what potentially could happen and where you could be moving and what all that looks like. I mean, it sounds like the future is just as promising as the present. So I'm really excited to dig into how all of that happened. But I like to do this thing where we kind of chat a bit about what you've been up to recently, where you've been, what you've been doing, and then we can kind of then rewind and work our way back up. So the last few weeks sounds like have been pretty busy. What have you been up to?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to thank you for the kind words. Over the last couple weeks, we have started construction on our second facility that is going to be within a 90,000 square foot complex. We have access to saunas, 750 lockers, chiropractor, PT. We have a pool. We have 2 soccer fields. We have pickleball courts, racquetball courts, yoga, and then our facility will be a little over 5,000 square feet, and it's going to be like kind of this weird brain child of mine that I've always wanted, basically kind of bridging the gap between what we have with our current gym at Optimus Barbell weightlifting and then bridging it into what I'm doing with strength and conditioning and general sports performance as of right now. So we're kind of looking at, we're going to have the assault bikes, the echo bikes, obviously all sorts of conditioning equipment. We're going to have all sorts of machines. We're going to have power racks. We're going to have black field turf down the center. We're going to have weightlifting platforms, belt squats, pendulum squats. We're going to be like we're going to make it a full service shop essentially. So I'm a strength coach at 3 different high schools: Salem High School, Canton High School, and also Fenton High School. So we control over 34 total sports. I am an assistant head coach for our football team at Salem and also the offensive coordinator and offensive line coach for them as well. I'm an instructor for USA Weightlifting. I coach a rugby program for strength conditioning on top of that. Last year during the off season, I went to the Detroit Lions facility and helped them with their off season strength conditioning for Olympic weightlifting. I'm hoping that we can renew that contract going into this off season. And I also have, family and a newborn, like a 3.5-month-old son, and I have a 2.5-month-old son. And, that's been a blessing and just a learning experience in itself. So things have been wild. We've expanded in a lot of locations recently, and I've learned kind of where we want to be at in this general strength conditioning, weightlifting, sport performance, whatever you want to call it. Just kind of be in this all-inclusive model to where we can help anyone from someone that's 6 years old all the way up to we have a member that's reaching into the 60s that weightlifts. So we want to be able to do every single facet of strength conditioning, weightlifting, general program design, nutrition, rehab. We want to do it all.
Yeah, I'm just there's one question. It's the only question that I think you can really have after listening to that. You're either on incredibly high dose of amphetamines, or you have multiple Zacks that are working underneath you to be able to manage all that. Um, I mean, it sounds like a tremendous amount of work, in the sense of like a bunch of different places, a bunch of different positions. And obviously you didn't just like end up here. You didn't just like, oh, I'm going to reach out to all these schools, and at the same time, things are going to fall into place, and I'll just happen to also have a few gyms, and I'll just also happen to have these other things. Um, it likely was very well built into and developed kind of slowly. Um, when did you get your start in? I want to say most generally just lifting weights. Like, when did you touch your first barbell? This podcast is brought to you by Onyx Weightlifting Co. I've been very selective about finding sponsors for the show, but after much deliberation and conversation with Chris and Danny, the co-owner and founder, we decided that Onyx is beyond a great fit to support this podcast. Onyx is a brand built on providing the strongest and most comfortable straps, wraps, belts, and apparel to the weightlifting community, with the leather products handcrafted by the same barbell calloused hands that you have. Make sure you pick up something today at onyxstraps.com using the code PHILWL for 10% off of your purchase. That is onyxstraps.com, ONYX straps.com, using the code PHILWL for 10% off of your purchase. And thanks as always for supporting the show.
Oh, that's a great question. So that was with my dad. That was back in 1997.
Mm,
So I'm 37 at this point. I've been playing 3 sports a year since I've been like 3 years old.
yeah.
Um, I played soccer for like 12 years, and then I kind of grew into this body that soccer just wasn't going to be my sport. So my dad thought we'll play football in high school, and my mom ended up dropping me off in the weight room. I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I met my football coach, and I started kind of what was the bigger, faster, stronger program. And that started at like 12, 13 years old, to where, I was learning power cleans. They were also doing some power snatching at the time. And then we were just training very hard. I kind of fell into like the perfect storm at the high school that I was at, because it was a losing program for like 20 years. And then in 1999, it became this juggernaut of, you know, not only did we turn everything around, but we were putting up like 70 points on teams
Wow.
every week. And I always played offensive line my entire life, and I was always very undersized. So the work ethic that my mom and my dad kind of instilled in me was, there's always going to be someone that's bigger, faster, stronger, but there's not going to be a person that's going to outwork you. And that was good and bad, obviously, because it does makes me like a workaholic now, being later in life. But during that phase, there was never going to be a time where I never showed up to a workout. I was always there. I was always going to be first. I was always going to be first in line, and I was going to outwork everybody. And that allowed me to be, when I walked into high school, I was 110 pounds, and I was starting as an offensive lineman.
Mm, wow.
And then as I've gotten, more athletic and bigger, I was fortunate enough to, even as a senior, I was only about 185 pounds, but, I was obviously an all conference player and things like that. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go to college and get a football scholarship there. And that's where my body blew up to be a little over 300 pounds.
Wow.
I went in my freshman camp at like 185 pounds, I think I started. And then I graduated about 310. Yeah, I just hit this massive growth spurt. And it was kind of the same thing in college. Like, my only losing team I've ever been in my life was my freshman year football team in college. Then we got a whole different coaching staff, um, and we turned it around. Like, ended up being conference champions, making it all the way through, and just turning around the general culture of there as well. I went in with 63 freshmen. I graduated with 18 seniors.
Mm,
The attrition rate was high. We trained very hard all the time. And that was just the standard of from freshman in high school all the way to a senior in college. The standard was we are going to outwork every single person we touch. And we're not going to be loud and boisterous about it, but we're just going to put our foot in the accelerator and run. We're not going to let it off until we reach the goal.
mm,
And that's kind of how I started in training, was back when I was like 12 and 13. I just got in this mentality to where I lived in that weight room. Nothing else mattered to me. And it wasn't really so much the weights per se, it was training, it was making my body something different for the sports that I needed to play, or I wanted to play rather.
mm. And you kind of talked about, starting sports when you were younger, and then kind of showcasing that work ethic throughout. Is this and now, 25-ish years removed from the first time you started lifting, um, you're obviously not competing in those sports still, but what we see is there's this work ethic that exists, and that is independent of just being like in the weight room or on the field, right? Was that something that also existed when you were younger? Was it like in the gym, on the field, outwork everyone, and then also off the field? Was it kind of the same thing, or was that more of a late developing kind of like capacity?
It was a kind of a weird thing to help develop, because honestly, like when you're doing something you want to do, like a sport, for me, it wasn't hard to dive in to being like a workhorse in that avenue, like football or lacrosse or wrestling or anything of that nature. Like that just, it made sense to me. But in other phases of my life, like I started working at like a pizza shop. I guess shout out to Jets Pizza when I was 14, because my mom and dad said you're going to get a job when you're not at practice or doing homework or anything like that. So it wasn't like I loved going to work after practice or on the weekends or things like that. But what it did do is it kind of kept me out of
Mm,
trouble. Like I never had a drink of alcohol until I was going to college. And that's kind of different from a lot of the guys that I went to high school with, or I was never a partier, mainly because I was either working, I was either just hanging around with my friends, or I was training, or there's a different sport, or things like that. Um, but it really didn't click to me that that was how I needed to operate my entire life until
mm,
I got probably to my late 20s, to where I could utilize that for not only a business market, but I could also take that mentality and shove it into my work life and do something special or do something different, or at least something that I wanted to do.
mm. And what was your background, kind of coming out of college? What Where were you looking to go? Was it like, I'm going to stay in sports because that's what I've done, that's what I know, um, and it's obviously been uh, such a huge part of my life, or did you kind of do the other thing where it's like, I have a degree in X, or I'm just going to kind of get a job? Like, where did your professional path kind of go after school?
I always like wanted to do something in the sport realm. I just didn't really know how to get there.
Mm,
So I started off. I worked in I intern. I have a double major in international business and psychology, so I don't have like a kines background or
Mm,
anything like that. But I interned for my senior thesis at a logistics company in Detroit, and they ended up giving me a job, and I worked there for a couple years, and I ended up throughout that meeting some people along the way, and I ended up interviewing with a company called Boston Scientific, and I was a clinical technician for them. So basically, what I did was I went into operating rooms every day and work on chronic pain patients. So what
mm,
my device was, or what I was working on and being kind of an engineer with, was a spinal cord stimulator. And so anyone that would have had chronic pain of the trunk and limbs, they would do a trial to see if this device would help, and then it would do a permanent surgery. So that was the company that I worked for. To get there, I had to do a month of shadowing all over the state of Michigan, all the way up to the UP to being around southeastern Detroit. And I was able to be pushed along in the process. And then I met the territory manager and the overall regional manager at a Starbucks in like West Bloomfield, Michigan. And I had to pitch the device without ever really seeing the device or having any training on the
mm.
device. So I went on their website and I pulled everything that they had and I made a PowerPoint based off of their website and I took it to the meeting and they loved that. Um, I ended up getting the position under conditional basis. I had to be out in California in Valencia on like their general compound for 3 months. And that was training from cadaver labs to engineering on a device to tests or quizzes every other day. And I think we went in with like 32 people and we ended up graduating like 13
Wow.
because if you failed anything, you were gone. Mainly because like if you fail something doing that, you're gonna kill somebody
Mm,
and or paralyze someone, and that's just or on top of that, you're gonna lose like $1 million contract, and that's just not gonna be cool for a business. So we were doing cadaver labs, and I was in like being around their clean room, seeing how the device was made. And then I had this 6 month shadowing process. And then I ended up kind of being on my own. And that happened earlier than I kind of expected, to where like one day someone got sick or something and they were like, all right, you got surgery tomorrow at X hospital. Here's the x-ray. Here's the patient. Best of luck.
wow.
And that was a job where you were on call 24/7, 365. And it was such a cool experience from an engineering perspective and from a helping people perspective. And that's when I kind of figure out that I wanted to be in a helping people business or helping people arena. Um, but it was a volatile industry to where, not only are you responsible for someone's life, you're also responsible for almost training the physician that's doing the surgery. If they have questions, you're also trying to manage the business side of it. You're also trying to manage the patient, um, and you can't make any mistakes.
Mm,
Like, this is a zero mistake game. If you make one mistake, you're either losing the contract or you're really affecting someone's life in a negative way. So the stress was something that I liked originally, but then it became overall suffocating. And over a couple years of doing that, it just the burnout is real from that, because I wasn't able. I was dating my now wife. I was dating her at the time, and we would have to drive separate to dinners. And if someone gave me a call, I had to leave immediately.
mm,
Um, and although I made great money, it was a learning experience for a couple things. I learned that my quality of life matters.
mm,
I also learned that I wanted to be in some sort of people industry. Um, and at the time, my wife was having some health issues. My dad, he passed of cancer in 2015. So he was in the hospital. my wife was in the hospital a lot. So not only was I working in a hospital, I was spending my free time in the hospital, and I just was like, this is enough. Um, After working at Boston Scientific and doing that, I worked in physician contracts, and that's kind of when we moved to Florida. And that's kind of how I met Rod and all that other stuff from Freedom Weightlifting. And we'll climb down that rabbit hole whenever you want. But I started doing physician contracts and working for a company that did kind of recruitment for um, different physicians and placing them all over the country and handling different contracts at hospital systems and things like that. Um, and that's how I was always kind of a gym junkie at that point because I was bouncing around to different CrossFit gyms or different powerlifting gyms, and I was weightlifting at the time. And I was weightlifting at a powerlifting gym, and kind of like the outcasts, like snatching on steel plates and lowering them down, and having like powerlifting guys tell me like that's a weird deadlift while I'm snatching. Um, and a gentleman, his name is Steve Jenkins. He I don't know if he still operates his gym in Palm Beach Gardens or not, but he had like a 1,500 square foot gym, and I was training there, and that's how I met Jennifer Schrage. And he kind of asked me to, would you be interested in running a weightlifting class? He's like, you lift a lot, you clearly know what you're doing in some capacity. And I go, yeah, sure, whatever. And I thought that, 3 people were going to show up. And 32 people showed up on day one.
Oh,
yeah. And I credit my wife for that because she was a manager at Lululemon, or assistant manager at Lululemon at the time. And she, I didn't know that she put my class on like their sweat schedule. So I had this immediate boom. And the business side of me kind of took over at that point of being like, okay, there's a demand. And then the coach side of me was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I need to figure this out. And the class went, I would say, like, I'd give myself like a C minus like, in regard to how I did. I probably stuttered all over myself, and my training probably was all over the place. But I started kind of entering the weightlifting model at that point, and I kind of looked up people around me, like who are the weightlifting coaches around me. I was in West Palm. I only knew of Soul in Miami. They were doing their thing. Vero Beach was just kind of coming up at the time. Like Brian was someone he was still lifting competitively, I believe, but he was coaching and he was building his thing. And then there was Camargo up in Orlando, and there really wasn't a lot in between. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. And I started coaching at one gym, and then that turned into 2. And then before I knew it, I was in 5 different gyms and working my regular job. So when my dad passed in 2015, he was a workaholic and an engineer and, obviously a great guy, but he never really took the time to enjoy life. And when he passed, I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be grinding away in something that I don't want to do. So my wife and I made a decision to where, hey, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do this coaching thing. We're going to see how it goes. And I think my wife asked, like, what's going to be our pay cut? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure like 99%. And so I cashed out a 401k, and that helped us live for a while. And we were in the process of moving back to Michigan because Julie has a large family from Michigan up here, and she wanted to be closer to home, and she was having some health issues at the time that would make it easier for us to be closer to home. My dad just passed, so I wanted to be closer to my mom to help take care of my mom. And we ended up kind of moving back here, and that's where that kind of took us. Optimus at that point, I think we had like 33, 34 people in our club at the time. And then when I moved up, that condensed to like maybe 7.
Wow.
Because it went from like, and I get it, like it went, people wanted me in person. They didn't want to be remote, and that's completely fair. I get that. And so there was a lot of learning curves along the way. Throughout that time, I started working at another gym up in Michigan and helping that individual grow his weightlifting gym. Um, and we were kind of taking it from a perspective of like, hey, we're doing this together. We don't necessarily know what we're going to do, but we're gonna grow. And there really wasn't a gym like that at the time of just pure weightlifting and nothing else in southeastern Michigan. And before we knew it, that gym grew from, I don't know, 17 or 18 members to 115 members.
Wow.
And grew from like a 15, maybe 1,000 square foot space to a 4,000 square foot space. And I recognized in that time frame of like, the only way I'm going to make money in this industry is I work 7 days a week.
Mm.
So I would work in that individual's gym from 5:30 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night some days. And I would work Monday through Sunday every day. It didn't matter. Mainly because I knew that was going to pick up volume. And I don't know how else to make money in this industry besides being in volume.
Right.
And that's kind of where that kind of led, that working mentality of kind of, I took everything from being younger and learning all that stuff to now putting my foot on the gas pedal. And it didn't matter whether I had one person show up at 9 o'clock in the morning, I would be there all day, 5:30 to 7 or 8 p.m. It didn't matter. And that's kind of how I grew myself as a coach, and how my perception as a coach of people knew that I was going to be around all of the time. And if I was somewhere, I had my phone on me 24/7. It didn't matter whether it was 10 p.m. or 5 a.m. I'm going to answer that message. And that's how that grew to kind of where I started coaching. I went from coaching 7 people to coaching 70 people while working inside of someone else's gym. And then I was kind of programming individually for all these people and working hands-on with these people every day, and having a blast. Like, honestly, it was such a cool learning experience to be in that headspace, to be in that environment, to watch not only the gym grow but the sport grow kind of right underneath of our noses. Because I think my first youth nationals was like 2013. And I don't know, I think there was like 200 people there, something like that, to where we went to the first AO series in Grand Rapids, and there's like 1,000 people that showed up. And you watch this growth, this explosive growth through CrossFit, through all these people trying to find their next avenue of how they want to continue being athletic or healthy, or having a sport to call their own, something to move them forward, and not just kind of work their 9 to 5 and that's kind of it, and go to like a powerhouse or anything like that. I'm not knocking powerhouse by any means, but it was a fun turn to see that sport grow, and how my mentality and a coach grew, how my philosophy grew from it. I always took I guess what people would referred to as like a quote unquote unconventional approach to weightlifting. But I never thought of it as unconventional in regard to my programming style or methodology. I just thought of it as a sport. So if it's a sport, I want to give people an off season. I want to give people a season. During off season, we're going to do all of the building work. We're going to do all the accessory work. We're going to push the boundaries on where we can take our body to. And then while we're in season, we're going to maintain. We're going to make sure we're getting very good at the things we need to be good at. And to me, that was just like a college football thing. Like, when we're in season, we're going to run those same plays over and over and over again until they're locked tight. when we're in season in weightlifting, you're going to get real good at your opener. um, and then in the off season, we're going to do the things like we're going to do the yoke carries, we're going to do the sled drags, we're going to do the chain squats, the banded pulls, we're going to do, you know, a front foot elevated split squats, the tempo back squats, the tempo split squats, the lat pull downs, the back extensions. We're going to bench. We're going to do football bar bench. We're going to do it all. Mainly because it's like I never understood the concept of there being like a scary exercise for a
Mm.
weightlifter. I just thought, hey, let's develop the best, strongest athletes that we can and then show them how to weightlift.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those podcasts where I could just sit back. I mean, I have my cup of coffee next to me. I could just sit back, sip on this, and hear you talk for, 30 minutes and be totally entranced by what you're saying and the storyline and just wanting to hear the next thing and the next thing. So I think that's awesome. I always love these shows. And I think, honestly, for the podcast, I get this, from people who are talking about, this like niche topic and something they've researched for decades, or, it's someone like yourself who just has this like crazy story kind of from start to finish or start to present and hearing how it kind of unraveled. Um, is really really interesting. And I think really insightful and also helpful for people listening so they can understand like what does it take to do what Zach's done. Oh, you have to work really really hard and put yourself out there and move around the country and like explore all these opportunities and develop this like expertise and really put your time in. And it's like, okay, can you do that? If you can, yeah, you might be able to do the same thing he's done. But if not, it's gonna be a lot more difficult. So I think it's really interesting to hear like the life experience and then also like the qualities, the personal qualities that have gone along with developing all of that stuff. I'd be really interested to hear how you developed kind of as a coach. You did mention having like that SNC background and that kind of approach to weightlifting, which I would call like that's a very like classic kind of like periodization approach where it's high variability, high volume, working on general qualities, and then we're going to specialize and we're going to create this like funnel effect to where we get more and more specific with kind of lower and lower volumes. And then you're like doing the sport as much as you can, getting as much practice as you can, and then you have a break, and then you kind of have that build back up, and then you kind of see that taper back down. And I really like that point about there aren't really any scary exercises, and I think I don't quite view it like this, but I think it's a great way to describe it. Muscles in the body, to some extent, they're really just machines, or it's a machine with machines inside of it, and it's like a muscle just responds to creates force, right? It just responds to resistance and it moves it. It doesn't matter if it's a football bar, or a straight bar, or a cambered bar, or a death row bar. It's like you're just moving resistance, and that's going to stimulate it to grow or to get stronger. And it's like, while the thing looks different or the position might be slightly different, um, that all of the training is kind of like general in nature because muscles can only respond in a few different ways when they're adapting to stress, and that's growing in size, improving its ability to tolerate like repeated exposure to stress, or like utilize energy more efficiently, um, or produce more force to move more weight. So it's like all these general kind of like adaptations, and they don't give a fuck what the bar looks like or feels like or sounds like the name of it. So I actually really like that. And that's something I've thought about a lot. Like there are no bad exercises. There's like a bad application of an exercise. And even that you can kind of, you know, you can kind of explain away if you're smart enough. So I really like that. That stuff stuck out to me. As far as like developing as a coach in weightlifting, developing kind of like a technical model, developing a style of program that, while kind of like sport esque, can make the best weightlifters. Uh, who do you kind of credit that to, and what did that look like to where you kind of felt like, oh yeah, I'm a bad motherfucker like when it comes to coaching weightlifters? When did you feel like that kind of developed, and then you've gotten to this point where like you have 20 people at AO finals and you can coach people to that level repeatedly over time?
I mean, I'll be real with that. I really didn't think I made it until I left the Lions facility last year.
Yeah, that's
And
badass, dude.
right. And so like it's been this weird, it's been this wild ride to like even being at like the meets in Vegas and things like that and sitting around other coaches that are much bigger name than I am. And, you know, talking with them about their general program design and what I do. And for the longest time, I've always been called not like really a weightlifting coach,
Mm,
but just like a strength conditioning coach. And although there's, you know, I don't take any disrespect by that, it really kind of fueled me to where people were like, your brand of weightlifting isn't weightlifting.
mm,
And I'm like, well, what, who are you to call, who are you the authority on weightlifting? And why are you ridiculing my model
mm,
based around just an ignorant approach to the discussion? Like, there's a million different ways to skin this cat. And I look at when we're on, like, I'm in my gym right now, and sitting behind me, we have 13 platforms. And I tell each person that comes in this gym, you know, programming is a guideline.
mm.
I'm going to coach you, and our coaching staff is going to coach you every day. So let's say if that says 85% and it's not looking like that today, we're going to hunker down and we're going to stay at maybe 65, 70%, and we're going to hammer out the best mechanics that we can. On top of that, when we're on the platform, that is our skill development. We are fine tuning one thing each session. So if we jack up everything else, but we fixed the one thing we wanted to fix that day, we took a step forward.
Right.
And so when we're looking at skill, we are hammering skill to the nth degree: snatch, clean, jerk. We're breaking that down for the individual based around their lever length, based around their strength profile, based around their athleticism, based around how they're feeling that day, how they're beat up from the stimulus that they've handled all through the week. And then when we're done doing our skill that day, we are going to work our asses off in our little accessory area. And if I had to put a percentage on it, I would say we're at like 30% skill development and 70% body development.
Mm,
But our skill development is so, there's so much attention to detail on it to where I'm not like a big triple guy in the snatch or like even the clean and jerk really. I will keep us at doubles, or I will get up to 85% and we will do 10 singles.
mm,
But we will break down every single to where this needs to be perfect. And we will not move on until we met our goal that day. And that's good and bad as a coach. Like, I've had people snatch for 2.5 hours. I've also snatched for 2.5 hours. You know, like, you can climb down that rabbit hole and we can go there. And you have to pick the right individuals for that. And how I grew that, when I started in Florida, I thought I was, for a lack of a better term, I thought I was the shit.
mm,
Like, Florida had such this, you know, it's when I met Jennifer Schragi, Mika Huerta, Cheyenne Shank. Like, those girls were competing at a national and a world level in my first to second year. So I had a junior world lifter in Cheyenne Shank within 2.5, 3 years. I had a multiple time youth and junior nationalist within my first year. I had Jen that was competing at a very high level within, you know, top, she's been top 10 in the country for 8 years.
wow.
And she's the type of like, when I got there, I was like, oh my God, I am so good. I am the best coach that Florida has ever seen. And then when I moved back to Michigan and I had to teach somebody, this kid, which I still coach today, now he's a man. I had to teach him how to snatch with zero experience. And it was the most eye-opening experience that where I was like, I had no idea what I was doing as a coach. I could teach someone that had a base and I could refine the base. but I couldn't develop from start to finish. And so moving from Florida to Michigan helped me understand, okay, I had these I had this cognitive dissonance and delusions of grandeur, um, to where thought I was at one level and I was like 9 levels underneath of that. So I changed my thought process from being that I'm God's gift to earth
Mm.
to having to humble myself and be a grinding work ethic coach. And I had to reteach myself how to teach people how to do these lifts. And I will credit Coach Camargo because we were on Meredith's podcast earlier, right? Talking about that. He coaches her. He did my level one, and his coach, Bob Morris, at the training center, he worked with me.
Yeah.
And so I took my level one in Hialeah, Florida, I think 2012, 2013, something like that. And, you know, I was training at lunch, and Coach Camargo was like, "Who's writing your programming?" And I was like, "I don't know if you know him. His name is Coach Morris." And he was like, "Bob Morris?" I go, "Oh, yeah. How do you know him?" And he pulled up this like video of Coach Bob with the tucked in polo, all done up. And it was a young Coach Camargo lifting at some international meet somewhere. And that's when I was like, oh, this is a really small world.
Yeah.
And I relied on Coach Camargo originally at running someone at my first meet. I just stood behind him for like 6 hours.
Mm.
He didn't even know probably I was there, but I just stood behind him and watched him count and kind of learned, okay, this is not only do you have to count the cards, but you have to be aware of the room, you have to be a manager of the room, and you have to be a manager of your lifter.
Mm.
And as the rules have changed and as weightlifting has developed, now it's easy. There's a board up there, everyone has a start or their start number on their hip. So you don't really have to, you just have to look around to be knowledgeable. But between Coach Camargo and Coach Morris, they gave me a lot of the things that I needed in regard to being a good meet coach and being just a general quality coach.
Mm.
On top of that, I had a lot of good coaches growing up in sports, and I've had a lot of bad coaches to where they've either treated me and my teammates disrespectfully or, they hammered us into the ground. And so this process has been, I want to take the best of the best and I want to do the opposite of the worst of the worst.
Mm.
So I never wanted to be a coach to where when I was done playing football in college, I was done. I never watched a game until I started coaching a year ago.
Mm.
I was done. I didn't want to do it. I was burnt out from it. I didn't want to be in that environment where I was being ridiculed every day and had to deal with some mental health things down the line. I didn't want to. I didn't want to be that coach that did that to someone else. So I wanted to be the coach that was going to be on top of their game, that was going to push the boundaries of what we understood, what quote unquote training is. And I also just wanted to have a lot of fun. I wanted to take every experience I've ever had and roll it into what is Optimus at this point. And that's kind of what been my mentality on this entire thing of I don't want to be bound to a book.
Mm.
I want to live in the moment. I want to evolve in the moment. I want to maybe think of these things in a conceptually different manner. Like, this is what I get a lot of. Hey, what you're saying, Zach, is different than any other coach has told me.
Mm.
And I always say, like, what your coach has said in the past, like, that's not wrong. I'm not telling them what they're saying is wrong. This is just how I conceptualize this problem. I look at things a little differently. I look at things for the individual. And as a club, we want it to be something to where we don't want to be known for one methodology. We want to be known for pushing the boundaries in the best way possible.
No, that makes complete sense. And I remember I was reading a book. It was by Sherwin Newland, who was a surgeon, and he was talking about medicine. He was talking about I don't remember the exact word he used. Hopefully I don't screw it up too much, but basically he was talking about like these medical conditions or these medical complications as like the riddle, and you're trying to like figure out the riddle. So when you kind of framed it as like we're trying to figure out this problem, ultimately that's what it is. Like you don't have direct access to the the complete information in front of you, right? Like you can't see exactly how people are adapting to training. You can't really tell if they're putting on muscle. You can't really tell necessarily if they're getting stronger, given that like fatigue masks performance. um, you can't tell how they're going to perform at the meet. You can't tell what the situation is going to be. Like there are all these things that like are unknown and you have to kind of like figure out or guess at. And it's like, okay, how do we create the best solution to this problem of all of these unknowns, and then execute on it, and then reassess, execute on it, reassess, this process of like continual refinement. So I really like the way you kind of frame that, and that's kind of how I conceptualize it. And I think, I kind of have my own flavor of coaching, and I think my flavor is probably different than most. I'd say it's more like it's kind of like how Dane Miller coaches, in that there's like a lot of variation, a lot of variety. I definitely see the lifts as like mostly a skill. It's like, how do we improve a skill? It's using different lifts that can teach the movement, emphasize different aspects of it, uh, help the athlete become more like uh, more selective in the way they perform it, and you give them the right solutions, they choose those solutions, and then they do that more over time. um, Now, as far as bridging because when you were kind of listing out all of the things you're involved with, all of the things you do, you mentioned the gyms, you mentioned the weightlifting, you also mentioned working at 3 high schools. And for people listening to the podcast and that have listened to the podcast previous episodes, I've mentioned that I'll be working at University High School starting June 1st, right?
Right.
And I'll be overseeing a bunch of teams there. And I've been kind of thinking about that as a problem too. It's like, what's the problem when you have a bunch of untrained, uh, very, very kind of trained athletes who are younger, who play maybe multiple sports or a sport, but don't have that developmental base? What's the solution to that problem? And it's like, okay, is it more general, kind of like basic barbell training? Like, how do you structure it? How much should be sport specific? I've been just like thinking about that stuff. When was your involvement, or when did your involvement with the high schools, and then we can kind of get into like the Detroit Lions and all of the other teams that you are essentially going to possibly be working with, when did that start, and when did it kind of branch or bifurcate into like S&C and weightlifting?
Yeah, I mean, it started. It started in about 20. So this is my 5th year. So 2018, I would say, was our first meeting, and the individual is a track coach at the high school I coach at now. Her name is Becca Corfage. She coaches the girls track team at Salem, and she tossed this idea out there of like, hey, would you be willing to do some strength and conditioning at Salem? And I go, yeah, of course I'm interested. And she set up this meeting, which was at a bar and, you know, locally. And I met with the track coach and the football coach.
Hmm.
And it started on like, this high school was losing high school across the board, losing culture across almost
Wow.
every sport. And they were actually my rival high school when I was growing up. And we used to like put on like 60, 70 points on them every football game. Like it just, I never understood why they were bad, because it's not like they had different kids.
Mm.
It just, something was wrong. And so I took this meeting and they said, okay, we're starting in the summer. I said, all right, cool. And at the time I was coaching at Concordia University as the strength coach for their football program. And I decided to kind of take this on. And I said, okay, let's see what, day one is at summer conditioning. We met at the football field, and I think we had 16 kids show up. And the football coach goes, man, I'm so excited. This is double the amount of kids we had last year.
Wow.
And I go, oh, we're about to be bad. And that was like my first, I go, we are going to be absolutely horrible. And um, for they were bad, and for a lack of a better, it wasn't from them being bad as an athlete. They were good athletes, and they
Yeah.
worked extremely hard. Like at Salem, we've had three 500+ pound squatters.
Wow.
We've taken the school squat record at 555 pounds. Like everything has kind of changed from that day one to now. And the realistic thing was when we got through summer conditioning, they were like, "Hey, do you want to do this during the school year?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely, let's do it." And so I would get into the school, and every day the weight room would be locked. It would never be open. No sports would train. And I go, "Okay, this has to change." And through one of the coaches, he goes, "Would you mind doing a school wide program?" I go, "Let's do it. Let's take it on." And we formulated this business plan of how to get it rolling. And that started basically in the pandemic. And we had to figure out training. Like I was training people at my house in the garage. I was training like outside because we weren't allowed inside. We were just kind of managing. And then it just blew up. All
Mm.
these kids just started really liking getting coached, not just at their sport, but being coached in the weight room. And I was taking the weight room side of it just like I would coach any sport. Like we're going to have structure, we're going to have attendance, we're going to have attention to detail, we're going to have school camaraderie, and we're not going to train like football at, you know, we're not just going to train football at one session and then do every other sport. And that following session, we're going to train every sport at the same time. And we're going to write different programs per sport. And we're going to coach it, and we're going to coach our ass off. And it created this school camaraderie and culture that started to build.
Mm.
And now, you know, all of the football team is heading to girls basketball games, guys basketball game. We're going to track meets. We're supporting the school culture because we're training together as a school, as a big large team. And we're all kind of working hard together. We're suffering together. We're having fun together, and we're growing as a school. Now our girls basketball team, they went to the Final Four last year or this past year. They were undefeated till the last game. Our football
Mm.
team is starting to turn this around. The culture is starting to turn around. Our baseball team's good. Our basketball team's good. Our swimming team is good. Our gymnastics team is top notch.
Wow.
And it's not just the weight room because there has been other coaches that have come on board that have taken a modernized approach to coaching kids. And the problem was these kids were being coached like I was being coached back in the 90s or early 2000s. And that just doesn't work. And these kids they're not motivated by what I'm motivated by. I need to change my approach. I need to give them what they need. They need to feel like they matter in this avenue. And that's really exploded at Salem to where, we were starting with 16 kids. Now I have 50 to 65 a day. And we open it up not just to sport programs, but if you pay $100 a semester, if you don't play any sports, you can come in the weight room and learn. And you can
Wow.
train. And that's opened it up to where, we've had numerous kids that don't play any sports whatsoever end up playing sports because they're just inside the environment. And I just thought that this is going to be something that, hey, I come on board, I just train a few sports, and it's turned into what I do now isn't just coaching and managing a weight room and building programs and making people strong and being energetic. It's creating organization, it's creating structure, it's creating school culture, and it's breaking the stereotypes of, oh, only the football team belongs in the weight room at this time. No, everybody belongs in the weight room. Everyone deserves their attention. Everyone deserves to be having top-notch training for their sport. And that's been something that has blown up and got us into numerous different schools because I think the main issue with a lot of coaches is they go into the high school or they try to get to the high school thinking they're going to send a couple emails and they're going to pull the best weightlifters out of there and they're going to, have them in their club. I don't pull a single kid into my club.
Mm.
I don't have them compete unless they ask me to compete. Now, if I wanted to, I could probably bring to youth nationals a team of 80. But what am I sacrificing there? I'm sacrificing my trust with their coaches. I'm sacrificing most likely their development, because realistically, not all of us are going to get paid in weightlifting, or very few of us are going to get paid in weightlifting as an athlete. And it's finite. I want to be able to give them the avenue to get a scholarship, to expand to the next level in their sport. Weightlifting is always going to be around as a training methodology. It's not going anywhere. If you want to be a part of this team and compete at a high level when you're done with high school sports or college sports, awesome. I'm all for it. But your sport is primary. Your development for that sport is primary. And I'm very happy to say that at Salem, we sent 18 kids that signed D3, D2, or D1 scholarships on this last National Signing Day.
Wow.
And I don't know if that's a school record, but it's something that the administrative staff was impressed with. And it's something I'm proud of, to where we are taking kids and giving them the dream of, do you want to play at the next level? I'm going to show you what that means, what you're going to need, the type of person that you're going to have to be. And we're going to educate you on that. We're going to train you for that. And we're going to make sure that you're taken care of as much as possible.
And kind of with weightlifting, you mentioned it, taking a while to feel like you kind of had complete footing, and, you were able to kind of like, well, you kind of mentioned feeling this way, but like now it's kind of different, but like feeling like, okay, yeah, I definitely deserve to sit at the table with a lot of these guys. As far as like the strength and conditioning stuff, you had a very extensive background in athletics, so I'm assuming that was maybe a little more seamless. But with like the S&C at Salem, when did you feel like you kind of had your footing with that program, to where it was like, okay, we've developed a somewhat of a machine here that we can then take to, Fenton and the other high schools, and kind of implement it similarly, and have a reliable product?
That's a great question. I kind of knew in like 2021, when we started like smashing all these different school records, and kids were loving the weight room. The culture was getting better at the school. And, you know, everyone was just kind of getting along. It wasn't, baseball players hate football players or anything like that. It was everyone was together.
Mm.
And so I looked at it and I go, okay, no one's really doing it like this, in regard to taking the culture of the school as the primary. So I'm going to quote unquote sell the culture development first. Because at the end of the day, if you have a good culture, you're going to breed success naturally. Training, I mean, let's be honest, like with high school kids, I could take any program in the world, and if they do it with intent and we coach it properly, they're going to get progress out of it.
Mm.
We just end up doing individual programs for like the different sports and things like that, just because that's what I value. That's what I like to do anyway. But everything that we do in that weight room has an intent. It has a purpose. We explain the purpose, why it's going to be successful, what we are developing, whether it's ACL development or Achilles or jumping, or how to lower non-contact injuries. That was a big thing. When I first got to Salem, their non-contact injury was astronomically high. And we, knock on wood, we haven't had a non-contact injury since I've been there.
Wow.
And at the college level, that's kind of what you're graded at, right? You're graded on how you're hitting PRs and, how you're keeping your people healthy. So I kind of took that approach into it of like, okay, we're going to make sure that we are developing these kids from a foundational standpoint. And we could use like the Poliquin strength model for that, because like their foundational like balance program and their strength program is something that is very good in regard to unilateral development, trunk development. These kids are doing 150 back extensions a week
Mm.
with tempo, pausing. Everything has a perfect tempo, everything has a perfect pause, everything has attention to detail. And if they're not doing a bent over row correctly, they're going to get stopped. We're going to do it. And that was a lot of me coaching that at the time, scrambling around with 50, 60 kids. Now, now it's a lot of peer coaching. And these
Mm.
kids are like, hey, you got to make sure your back is engaged. You're just rounded. You're not doing anything. Hey, you're not pausing for 3 seconds at the top. Hey, that's a 10-second lower down. Hey, that's a very fast 5 seconds on back extensions. Now I'm hearing my voice throughout like these like 13 to 18-year-old kids, and they're holding their peers accountable, which is awesome. And they're doing it in a way that's healthy. They're doing it in a way that is beneficial. They're not just being jerks. They're not yelling at people. They're saying, hey, you're doing this wrong. Let's do it correctly, because what's the point?
Mm.
And that's the cool thing to see along the line, that that takes time to develop at each high school. And each high school is its own, to be fair, its own logistical nightmare. um, because it's really, you don't know what you're getting into until you're in it. And at our latest project at Fenton, I went into it with this program in my mind, that's going to, we're gonna, it's gonna be great. And I had to completely restructure it week one. And it's a being flexible with your environment is extremely important. Um, because when you're going into a high school or any matter, those kids don't know you from a hole in the wall. I could be the
Mm.
most successful person in the world, and they're going to be very skeptical of me until I prove my worth. And the only way I prove my worth is by getting them to understand that, hey, this guy cares about you. He cares about your development. And he cares about winning. And I love to win more than anybody. And we're going to win from inside that weight room first, and that's going to bleed into your sport and everything like that. So it's about being able to not be bound by your pillars of knowledge, but
Mm.
by utilizing everything, everything around you, to where like now some of these programs, I'm doing metcons after strength. I'm doing foundational balance and different unilateral movements, general strength and conditioning stuff, just because I'm limited on equipment. And I'm like, okay, well, I could either just say, hey, I don't want to do this because you don't have the equipment I need. Or I can say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure it out. Don't worry about it. I got this.
Mm.
And when I was at Central last week, being a guest professor with one of our other coaches, Aaron Scott, um, one of the kids was like, you're pretty self made, man. How'd you do it? And I go, well, first off, I'm not self made. And anyone telling you you're self made is a lie.
Mm.
I'm a product of my family. I'm a product of every single interaction I've ever been into regarding strength and conditioning. And I have a great staff underneath me. They're rock stars. They crush it in every avenue, and they care about the development of these kids. And they're okay being in an environment where you have to have 50, 60 kids in there, and you're going to have to figure it out, and you have to
Mm.
stay on top of your game. And that's been the greatest learning tool for me as a coach, going back into my gyms and saying, okay, I don't, you know, whatever cue I've been giving you isn't working. I'm going to evolve it. I'm going to
Mm.
figure it out, and let's make sure next session is different.
Mm. No, that makes complete sense. And um, kind of rounding out, I think all of the kind of the aspects of strength and strength and conditioning that you're involved with. Um, you mentioned the Detroit Lions. I'm just interested to know how that kind of relationship ended up happening.
Yeah, good question. So at Salem, I coach. So the offensive line coach for the Detroit Lions, his name is Hank Fraley. I coach his kids,
Mm.
which his oldest son Mason just got a Division two scholarship to play football and to throw for their track team. Um, so he pulled up to my house one day, the offensive line coach for the Lions, when I was training the kids during the pandemic, and he was like, "Oh, this is old school stuff. I love it." And I've always known who he was because of his name, and he's a 3-time Pro Bowl center. He was in the NFL for like 13 years, something like that.
Mm.
And you know, coaching his kids, I was just there to provide my service. And it was like a week before Easter last year, he sent me this message of like, "Hey, this is the head strength coach from the Detroit Lions. He's going to call you in the next week or so." Essentially told me not to screw it up. And so I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And his name is Coach Mike Clark, and he actually has a USAW background.
Mm.
I think he's in USA Weightlifting Hall of Fame,
Wow.
if I can credit him properly. He was a strength coach at, I believe, Texas Tech. He was strength coach for the Bears. Been in the NFL for a long time, and he does a lot of snatch and a lot of clean um, with his guys. And we talked maybe 4 separate times for like 45 minutes for an hour on just like cues, methodology, things like that. And he was like, "Man, you're saying things differently than I've learned." He's like, "Granted, the last time I took a seminar was years ago." I said,
Mm.
"Well, yeah, you were just trying to take what we got and evolve it into something new." And he offered me to come on in and shadow, and that was at the practice facility in Allen Park. Be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I said, "Okay, no problem." Um, so I showed up at 6 in the morning. I was in the lobby, and basically I watched a couple guys get cut,
Mm.
and I was like, "Okay, it's big time. It's real, right?" And he was visibly distraught because as the strength coach, you grow the relationship with those guys, and you're the person that's really building that relationship. And we talked about that in his office for like 15-20 minutes, and he looked at his watch and he goes, "Oh crap, we're late, we got to go to the field." I said, "Okay, no problem." So I'm there, I'm just standing behind him, I'm just shutting up because I am around all the starters and they're doing their stretching. I'm watching their stretches with the director of sport performance, Coach Jill Costanza. And I told her, I'm like, "I'm taking all these warm-ups because they're dope. They're awesome." And she was like, "Great, I want to learn under weightlifting." I was like, "Cool, man." So they introduced me, and I thought, that was it. Introduce me, boom, that's it, no problem. And he goes, "He's going to fix your Olympic lifts today, so pay attention."
Wow.
And I go, "Oh shit, I'm working." So like, I'm like, "Oh, I'm in it now." And so he goes, "We're going to put you with Frank." And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, "Are you talking about starter Frank Ragnow?" And he goes, "Yeah." And one of their other strength coaches kind of slaps me on the shoulder and goes, "Hey, you just signed a new contract, so don't fuck it up." And I go, "Okay, cool." And each of they have a beautiful sore next weight room, and pressure mats on everything that record to an iPad right in front of you. So if you do a snatch, it measures max velocity, max power output, things like that. And they were really big into doing no footing and like looking down, so they don't have like any issues with like tweaking traps, right?
Mm.
And I was like, "Okay, well, we can evolve that a little bit because we probably tweak our trap because we just have bad form."
Mm.
And I looked at it. I brought Frank's grip out a little bit. Had said, "Hey, I don't want you to look up. I want you to keep your cervical spine neutral throughout the entire lift. And I want you to control the first inch of the pull. But once that bar is off the ground, I want you to drive hard all the way through the ball of the foot and keep it there until the landing. The landing, I want you to be flat foot." They didn't want them to land hard. They just wanted them to land flat.
Mm.
So I just said, "Okay, land flat as quickly and as dominantly as possible." And first lift after the adjustments, max power, max velocity skyrockets. And he looks at me and he goes, and this is Frank. He goes, "Oh, this shit works." Like, and then the coaches were like, "All right, man, go work every other platform." And so I was working with, I just bounced around. If you're doing power cleans, cool. If you're doing block cleans, cool. I'll work with you. If you're doing snatches, cool. I'll work with you. Block snatches, no problem. And just kind of reinforcing how to grab tension in a different,
Mm,
conceptually in a different way. And then also kind of getting them to understand the tempo of the lift and the general mechanics of the lift. And every single platform went up in power and went up in velocity. So at the end of it, it's like, okay, I coached offensive starters, then I have 5 minute break, defensive starters, 5 minute break, special team starters, 5 minute break, and then second teams of offense, defense, specials. After that, we were fortunate enough, they have a chef on staff. They gave me lunch, and then they had a meeting afterwards of, okay, what did you see? How did you broke down every single program, what everyone did that day, and wrote your notes, and what's the next step are. And I learned in that way of how they're also changing their culture,
mm,
because all of those guys, I expected them to be like, very standoffish and like, I play in the NFL, so get away from me. But they were the most nice, cordial. I mean, they walked up to every single one, walked up to me, shook my hand, and said, "Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. That was awesome." And that was something that was, I didn't expect that. And it gave me this humanized approach to a dehumanized sport such as football.
right.
And going through the meeting afterwards, and they were asking me my ideas of like, what'd you see, what'd you do. I'm watching them like, essentially like telling me that they're moving people from the cut board to the team roster, and going over all these programs and me giving my thoughts and them listening and them just valuing my opinion and even giving me the option to coach all those people was an extraordinary experience. And that was the day to where, like, when I left there, like, I'll be real, I cried in the car because I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, I did it. I know what I'm doing is working, because all of the stuff that I've been doing at Optimus, or even the gym before Optimus, before we had a brick and mortar, I'm doing everything that the Lions are doing. I'm doing the unilateral development. I'm doing the glute bridging development. I'm doing the trunk work development. I'm doing the hypers. I'm doing all that stuff. And I was made to feel like a crazy person, or like that my brand or my methodology wasn't quote unquote weightlifting.
Mm,
And I was like, it created that imposter syndrome over years and years and years of being told that you're not enough, or your brand isn't enough, or you're inadequate, or what have you. And for me, that gave me a chip in my shoulder, but it also made me very, I never celebrated any wins.
mm,
And this is the first time I kind of sat back, and after this was all said and done, and they were like, "Yeah, we want to have you back," and I'm like, "All right, cool." I sat back and was like, "I did it." Uh, you know, Before we opened up our building in Optimus, we were in a parking lot. We were pulling equipment out every day into a parking lot and lifting our asses off, and at a really high level. And I went from essentially being let go of one gym, and a lot of my, pretty much, not only I was let go, but all of our people were let go, to reorganize what that gym wanted to do moving forward. I was in a parking lot to being at the Lions facility in 2 years. It's insane to me. And it gave me that feeling of, okay, I did it. I'm on the right path. I just need to keep evolving and not be satisfied from where I'm at. And it was a extraordinary feeling of self growth,
mm,
of you know kind of working through my own therapy stuff and being like, okay, I get it now. I can be the person that does something special, or our club
Mhm.
does something special, or we are doing something special. We can do that. And people want that, and people want to listen to it. And that was a really cool feeling for me to feel, because from someone that never felt like he was good enough, we're here now. And not only are we here, we're going to put our foot down on the accelerator. We're not going to take it off.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's not just fired up after listening to that, and also just like, I think you mentioned kind of the word humanized or humanizing or some aspect of that multiple times, and I think you mentioning that and talking through that, it was very humanizing. I feel like I was able to connect with your story, and I was able to relate, or am able to relate, and I actually had this thought maybe yesterday or the other day, and I've had this thought a lot, and this memory and this experience really sticks out, and I can connect with your experience at the Lines facility in this way. So I was on, I think this was in December. Yeah, I was in December, and I was on a train in Denver. I had a layover, so I was going to the city, and I was on a train, and I opened my email, and I got the acceptance letter to West Virginia University for the doctoral program, and I was like, this is like the only thing in my life I've been proud of.
Yeah.
And it was like,
By the way,
thank you, and that it was like, I'll say there are a couple of things. Another, don't want to avoid giving her shine. Coaching Danny Myers to like top 10 in the nation and squatting over 500 pounds, like she's fucking crushing it. I'm super proud of all her work, but like getting accepted into a PhD program, something where 10 years ago I was like, that's what I want to do. It's still to this day, every time I think about it, it's like, this is the really one of the only things I've really been able to be proud of, completely. And I think, hearing you talk about going to the Lines facility, being brought in, working with them, and then realizing like, okay, yeah, all of this work, it's had results, and it's had like a tremendous impact on myself and other people. And, we've been able to make a living off of it. We're continuing to develop it, but then having that one like really solidified, powerful moment of like, oh shit, this is the next level. This is like, really, it truly is like the upper echelons of the profession, a place where not many people get to sniff, and then I'm here like helping be a part of it, and somewhat develop it. And I think that's really special. Thanks for sharing that, and thanks for sharing such detail, because I think with podcasts it's a lot of like, this is what I did, this is what I've done. But and Meredith shared this with Worlds. She mentioned like after she won Worlds, there was like this come down where she just felt awful, and she was like, I don't know. She didn't feel right for like 7 months after. Um, and again, people go listen to the podcast and you'll get more context, but that's like the real shit. With people who are experiencing these like ups and downs, working for decades and decades, and finally realizing it, and like either feeling on the top of the world or underneath it. And I think to really hear that is special, and I think it's one of my favorite podcasts because of it. So what's next for Zach? What's next for Optimus? What's next for everything you've got going on?
so we're currently going to open up. Construction is almost done, but we're going to open up Optimus Sports Performance and Training Center. Like I said, in that 90,000 square foot sports center. So the goal for that's going to be open in June, and the goal for that is there is a um, there is a business that's in Michigan that they're like the player in regard to, you send all of your sports there to do camps, field time, indoor 7-on-7 practices, things like that. So we're going to make a play to try to be another player
Mm.
in that market. So we're going to be able to utilize our football fields and things like that inside of our sports center to brand, volleyball camps and soccer camps and football camps and everything like that. But on top of it, we're opening up that like 5,000 square foot gym that is kind of like I said, this weird brainchild of everything I want to do. I want to have
Mm.
everything possible in there. So We're going to have the power racks, the hypers, the belt squats, platforms, top-notch equipment, black field turf down the center. We're going to have assault bikes. We're going to have assault runners, echo bikes, kettlebells, all sorts of weights, every sort of machine you can imagine, pendulum squats, lat pull down, all that stuff. And we're going to be able to utilize it from anyone that just wants a general gym membership to come in and do like your day-to-day bro stuff to sports performance training at the best level, top level possible. So that's one thing that's going on. We also are in the process of making our own training app, which is pretty much done. We just have to pilot it over our team just to make sure it doesn't crash. But we're going to be removing from our current programming app, and I'm going to be using my own. And that's basically just taking all of the stuff of the different programming apps that I've found successful and just making my own. That's going to be on the horizon. We are continuing. We have a 86-person weightlifting club right now. Our goal is to kind of get over 100 in just weightlifting. In terms of everything else, we have 34 sports. I think it's close to 600 and some odd kids that we work with. It's kind of ebbing and flowing and continuing that process. But on top of it, it's learning for me to continue to grow as a business owner and as a coach. I'm evolving our staff to where now I have really good people underneath me, and I utilize them in every way possible to where we're changing around our structure to where, I'll be the owner and the coach, but under me is going to have a director of sports performance and development, a director of weightlifting operations, a general manager, operations manager, and then trainers underneath that. And so we're evolving this process to where I'm at a point in my life to where, I love all the things that I've done and where I'm at. But I've also learned that I don't want to be this individual that works myself into the ground. I want to enjoy my family. I want to enjoy my time off. I want to take time off without feeling like I'm disappointing somebody. I want to take time off and not feel stressed about taking time off. And that's in my own mental stuff and my own internal struggle with that. But it's evolving myself not only as a person, as a coach, as a business owner, as a strength coach, as a football coach, but also as a family man, and getting my kids to understand that it's okay, having this work ethic is awesome, but don't be defined by the work ethic. Don't be defined by something that is material. Define yourself by who you believe you are as a person and who you want to be as a person. And that's kind of the big thing of where I'm continuing at this point is, I don't want, I never thought in a million years I'd be at the Lions facility or being a guest professing speaker at Central Michigan or going to Eastern Michigan this past Monday. I never thought that would be possible. So now that things don't seem impossible, I want to do anything that we can do from the best and the best standpoint we can. And that's just taking an overall approach to not being bound by anything material, but just being bound by doing good work for people.
No, that was great, and I think that leads into, for people who are interested in keeping up with it and checking out kind of like the updates along the way. What are some good kind of like places we can send them to if they want to follow, Optimus and follow the development of kind of everything you're doing, Zach?
Yeah, our Instagram page is optimus.barbell. That is our page that I'm on pretty much 24/7. I do have a coaching page that I used to run all the time. I'm very rarely on it, but I do post some things from what I cook and my kids and general training here and there at Cinnamon_waffle. Those are my cat's names. So CINIMAN underscore waffle. And then our Facebook page as well is Optimus Barbell as well. But we kind of keep everything on our Instagram page, from anything from weightlifting to high school sport development to whatever we got going on next, from camps to seminars to clinics to whatever it is. And, you know, I want to say thank you for just having me on here.
Mm.
I think, like I said earlier, like this is my first podcast I ever did. I've turned down a lot of them, mainly because it didn't feel like the right timing or even the right audience.
Mm.
So this is something that I'm glad and fortunate and thankful to have done. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I know for a fact I'm gonna get a lot of great feedback from people in the Michigan weightlifting scene, from Rod, from kind of all the people associated with Freedom and Optimus and surrounding circles. So I really appreciate it. If anyone's interested in keeping up with me, that's Josh underscore Phil WL PHILWL on Instagram. It's philosophical weightlifting everywhere else. Thanks again for listening to the podcast, and we will catch you guys next week on the next episode.